So Joe, we're doing a Zoom meeting today with our new friend Grace Dow, who is a writer, a blogger, and we'll find out what else Grace is. Do you think it's really important for people with disabilities to write and do art and poetry and movies and all kinds of media to help people understand about disability, about living with a disability? Touch my hand or tell me with your voice if you think that's important. Okay. Let's try that again. I saw you had a spasm. So tell me if you think it's important for people with disabilities to do art. And yes, we do. And that's one of the reasons we're talking to Grace, because people with disabilities all are different, just like people without disabilities have different talents and strengths. And Grace, we met, well, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but let me introduce ourselves. I'm Jane, this is Joe. We do our little podcast called Transition Tuesdays with Jane and Joe. And as I said, this is Grace Dow, who's our special guest today. Grace, do you want, Joe's excited. Grace, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As I said, I'm 22. I live in Massachusetts. I've lived here my whole life. I grew up here. I'm a college student majoring in English. Again, I wanted to pick something that I wanted to major in, something that allowed me to do a lot of writing.
So have you always liked to write? Has that always been your thing?
As far back as I can remember, yes, I've always liked writing. English was always my favorite subject in school growing up. I was part of like the student newspaper in school and things like that as well.
That's cool.
Yeah, as far back as I can remember, I've always loved writing.
Well, I've been enjoying your blog. I really like the way you're very crisp and clear and to the point, but also make people think about different things. Like you write mostly about you're a person with, now do you say it cerebral or cerebral? There's a whole debate about that. Which way do you say it, palsy?
It depends. I mean, it's funny that you say that because it depends on who you ask.
Yes, I know.
But I tend to pronounce it cerebral.
Yeah, we do too. I do too. I like that.
But I mean, I can go to the doctors and see my doctors, and in a day I'll hear three different doctors pronounce it 3 different ways. So.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that something? I'm glad to hear you say that because I'm always confused about which way. I end up saying cerebral palsy too.
I do too. Yeah.
Okay, but my point was really about how you write about as a person with cerebral palsy. So why did you choose to do that?
I chose to do that because I think that people with disabilities oftentimes their stories don't get told by them themselves. They're told by, a lot of the time, you see they're told by non-disabled people, and they're not framed. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of like inspiration porn.
Yes, right. Yes. You said it nicely. I usually say pity porn, but you're right. That's right. So you decided You have a talent for writing, and you're gonna tell your story in your words and help people understand.
Because my biggest goal with writing is to be authentic and honest, showing all different kinds of aspects of living with a disability.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as you say that, here we are doing a Zoom meeting, and you and Joe are like, you're similar in age, both, American citizens, both have the same, diagnosis, and yet look how different both of you are. And
Yep.
both doing kind of the same thing, which is, disability advocacy, but also helping educate people. I think this is like a perfect metaphor for what you're talking about.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about, why, why do you just write about any other things, or do you really just focus on writing about disability?
I tend to focus on, for my blog's main purpose is for disability advocacy and that kind of thing. But I do write some poetry and that kind of thing too, just for fun, really. I don't really do that for any reason other than my own pleasure.
Yeah. So when you what do you hope will happen with your blog?
Well, I think it's already happening.
Yay!
I just want people to understand what it's like to live life with a disability. And WordPress has a way of being able to show you where your blog's visitors come from.
Yes.
Like what countries they're from. And I've had people from all over. I've had people from Ireland and Germany and Canada, and it's beyond my wildest dreams. It's more than I could have ever hoped for. I mean, I've only had the blog for a year. So when I started it last summer, I kind of thought that nobody would read it beyond like my family and friends.
Yeah, we've gotten messages from other countries too, and that just, it's shocking, but it's also it warms my heart, because I feel like, hey, we're doing this because we want to tell other people that they are not alone.
Yeah.
And we're not alone. What do you know? So that's great. So yes, and I do like the fact that, I have to admit, I will confess to you, Grace, that I have a blog, but I'm not very consistent with it, because we're doing this video stuff, and but it's really interesting how, like with YouTube, it's similar to when you do a website, you get all this analytic data back, and it's just fascinating how much you see what you're putting out, is where it's going. I'm really old, so my original career was in the newspaper industry, and you kind of knew how many subscribers you had, but you couldn't get data on how long somebody spent reading the newspaper and what they read. And I mean, it's really fascinating to me how we can learn about what people are doing with what we're creating. How are they using it? Do they share it with anybody? I mean, it's just amazing. You are growing up and developing your career in an amazing time. So now you're, where are you going to school?
the local community college.
Okay, do you do online classes or in person? What's your preference?
I do a mix of both.
Yeah, yeah. So because we're called Transition Tuesday, and I appreciate you being patient with me because some of these questions were not in what I sent you, but I figured we'd have a conversation anyway. But tell me about your transition planning when you were in high school.
My transition plan, I mean,
Be honest.
it wasn't exactly developed.
Okay.
I mean, it was part of my IEP. In Massachusetts, transition planning has to start at age 14. But I was the one who always brought it up, you know, in my IEPs. From my earliest years, I always knew I wanted to, you know, go to college and have a meaningful career and, you know, move out and get married. Goals that most people have. I had them too. And transition, my parents were big. You know, my parents were, you know, big advocates. They really helped me explore, you know, different, you know, all different kinds of careers, all different options. You know, I've always had an interest in, you know, as I said, writing, but another one of my interests is technology. I grew up and I went to all kinds of science and robotics camps and all these things. And so I knew I wanted to do something either to do with technology or writing. So my parents basically encouraged me to look at something and look at like careers in journalism or robotics or computers or something that they knew that one, I'd be good at, and two, I was interested in.
Absolutely. That's what anybody does when they're looking at what they're going to do post high school, right? So perfect, of course. Yeah. So did you like write down a plan, or when you say you kind of, what do you mean by, you know, you kind of?
I mean, my transition plan was not more than a few sentences on my IEP.
Gotcha. Right.
I mean, I made the IEP team aware of what my goals were and what my hopes for the futures were. But it wasn't like a plan per se, because I think it was all of 4 sentences.
Gotcha. I think that's fairly a typical experience for most people. So tell me about then maybe what were some of the obstacles that you had to deal with as you were moving forward after high school?
The biggest one was of course not having the school provided support anymore.
Yeah.
I lost, like, as soon as I graduated in 2018, I graduated with the rest of my class, and I lost, like, I had been receiving bi-weekly physical therapy since I was in preschool and stuff like that, and I lost that as soon as I graduated from school. So it led to my spasticity and it becoming worse and increased pain immediately following my graduation. And I started to wonder why. But the more I thought about it, it was like, well, 13 years of having therapy twice a week. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait, well, you don't have that anymore.
It was making sounds like, yeah. And I think something happens. I don't know, like Joe started really experiencing a lot. Well, Joe, you were experiencing a lot more pain, like right at that time when he graduated from high school, all of a sudden
Yeah,
his hip was really hurting him. And I mean, it's weird. It's like something changed overnight. So, and then Joe also struggled with getting therapy services, but he's a little different from you. We stayed in school, for the post
yeah,
graduation services because of what you're saying, but I could see why you wouldn't opt for that because, you were interested in going to college, so you were ready. But yeah, so pain, and were you able to get PT services?
yeah. I've been able to receive biweekly PT through a local outpatient clinic here in town.
Okay.
Really, because when I saw my physiatrist, I started to complain
Yeah, right.
because I was like, this is really bothering me.
Yeah.
I'm in a
So-
lot of pain. So
Have you transitioned to all adult doctors now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that like, transitioning over?
in that aspect, I consider myself more fortunate than most young adults, I think, because the primary care practice I was in, they see adults.
Ah, yeah,
And my physiatrist and my eye doctor and my orthopedic surgeon and everybody. I had been a patient at Boston Children's. That's where I was seeing them. But they also see, again, they treat adults at Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital. So when I hit 22, I did have a moment of panic. I was like, well, what's going to happen to all my care? So I emailed them and I said, and they're like, oh, they were like, oh, don't worry, we'll just see you at the adult hospital. So
Okay.
it didn't really mean that I have to switch providers or anything, which I kind of consider myself very lucky that I didn't have to do that.
yeah. Well, I've always heard that New Hampshire is great with services.
Yeah,
Sounds
New
like-
England generally tends to be very,
Yeah, so, well, we talked about, school and your transition process and everything. Can you tell me about, this is going to be our last question, because I appreciate your time, but, I know, everybody's got things to do, but who are some disability advocates that you admire? Because you obviously have taken on that mantle and are amazing at it, but who are some of your heroes or mentors?
I really admire a lot of people in the disability community. I know you're familiar I'm familiar with the Habibs, Dan and Samuel
Yes.
Habib. I really relate to them because again, Sam is close in age to both Joe and I, and has experienced a lot of the same things that we've gone through. As far as older people, Judy Hillman.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
She just, she was she was a big part in getting, the ADA passed, and they did the Capitol crawl, and they, all that kind of stuff back in the, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So yeah, I'd say those are my two biggest ones.
Yeah, that's pretty much where we are. We have a few other people that are kind of local people in our community, or but but that's about right for us too. So for people looking to find you, Grace, your address is gracedowwrites.com, right?
Yep.
And you're on Facebook as well.
Yep, Facebook, Twitter, and then LinkedIn as well. Yeah.
Okay. So, we'll put some direct links in comments and stuff if you'll email me where you want, what you want there. We are very excited to have met you and talked with you today. And we are looking forward to seeing where your career takes you in the future and following your advocacy work. Thank you for.
All right, thank you for having me. It was great.
All right. Well, take care. See you
All
next
right, you
time,
too.
everybody.